What is up, everyone? So Ryan with Impossible Game Labs, and today I'm going to talk to you about the blue team. Now, unlike last time, I'm going to do less cuts and edits in this particular video, so this is going to be a little bit more off the cuff, off the top of the head. And what that means for you is that it may be a little bit longer and a little bit harder to understand, but I will try not to sound like a rambling idiot as I do it. But I need to cut down the time it takes to generate these videos a little bit so I can keep on the content schedule that I want. So anyway, let's get to it. Today, we're going to talk about the blue team. And of the two teams, the blue team is the lower dominance value of the two teams, but you're going to have a lot more options. And as we did before, we're going to take most of these characters away. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with we're actually going to start with your tank and your support. Now, unlike last time, where what we discussed first was a particular class, what we're going to talk about here is kind of the backbone of this team, which is the keeping your guys alive so that they can do lots of damage team. You'll notice that there are two different ways that you can mitigate damage coming from your opponent. And the first one over here is going to be Titan's guarding ability. So when we talk about Titan, his most notable feature is that he is 7 health. He has the highest health in the game at the moment. And he is a tank, with some very, high tanking ability. He is probably one of the better full tanks in the game. Or at least for just like classic tanks with no special abilities. This is your guy. Okay. So you can use it, once on one turn or twice on one turn, or once on one turn and once again on another turn. And each time he guards something, he will let you move 2 damage over to him. This is a really good use of efficiency and mana, because even if you do get him killed essentially, or even if you've done the full guard, he's only going to go down to, take 4 damage. So your opponent still has to do at least 3 damage to kill him. And even then, he's only a 6. He's one of the bigger characters on your team, but he's not the only dominance value that you have on your side. When combined with Anastasia, you start moving damage over to Titan first, and then once you're in clutch situations, you bust out these heals here. In this particular situation, when you're playing against the orange team is going to have a lot of dominance, but not a lot of actions. So sometimes just being able to turn the tide of something that used to be deadly and getting that mana off to heal is everything that you need. Because if you can force a attack that was going to go on a carry or one of your more vital characters to go on to Titan and he dies instead, well, you know, that's called tanking for your team. So Anastasia's main ability is these 2 heals that she can get here. I recommend not blowing them all at once the first time you take damage. For one thing, you don't always have to save a character just because it's taking damage. So for instance, if Cerberus is out and he's attacked and he has taken 3 damage, 2 things. One, you do not have to spend both on him to save him. You can just do the one. Because it forces your opponent to take another action against Cerberus, which wastes their time taking out bigger targets. Because again, Cerberus only contributes 1 dominance, so if your opponent spends a lot of time trying to take him out, that's actually probably pretty good value for you. You may not want to try to save Cerberus at all. If he takes the 3, you may just want to save the mana and go after one of your, 5s or 6s, to keep them alive. Anastasia's secondary ability is a mild CC. It can hit anything but carries. Use this to stun down a tank or a healer if you are taking an offensive. Specifically if you're hitting maybe more than one character or your opponent has more than one ability to heal or guard and you want to kind of send them in one way or another. For instance, you want to force them to guard the damage instead of healing the damage. You might want to stun down their healer so that the guard has to take that damage over. It's a less generally less used ability, but it is just adds a little bit more crowd control utility to her beyond her healing utility. The other thing that's kind of interesting about Anastasia is that she has an unusually low critical value of 3 instead of 4. When it comes time for her to do attacks, it's actually more likely than average that you're going to get that critical value off. Titan's secondary ability which is used from the front line, is Force Barrier. Force Barrier will allow you to put 2 ability armor tokens onto any 2 characters. These are useful specifically for stopping stuns. So for example, by putting that Force Barrier on, say, if you had a configuration where both Titan and Hollow were up front, having Force Barrier on both of them can stop CC from Hex on your opponent team. If you're ever playing against an opponent who's playing a very CC heavy game, you'll be able to use this to protect a couple of your key characters, your key upfront characters from being stunned. Stunning is one of the best ways to take tanks out so that they're not getting their value and they're not protecting kills. So having your tanks protected by barriers is actually a really good way to make sure that your characters don't die. At the same time, while putting these 2 barrier shields down, it actually does some light CC to an opponent as well. So it's a little bit expensive of a move at 2 mana, but it actually brings a lot of value out with it. Next in this lineup, we will talk about the carry. As far as carries go, Cerb is really, really easy to get value out of, because basically all you have to do is W mouse 1, what we call it when playing these games, but basically you turn them 45 degrees and there you go, 4 damage. That easy. That will kill basically any offense in the game and a lot of supports. Things like that. Anything but tanks will basically die to 4 damage. And then further, you roll that, and seeing as how you get a critical on a 2+, which is carries have the best criticals in the game, with those 2+ criticals, that is 5 damage easy. 5 damage is enough to kill him off tank. So you're actually doing a lot out of this character. No mana spent, no deep strategy or anything like that. Just tap him, do damage. What that does is that essentially makes Cerberus an initiator. He's a really good initiator because with very little, planning or whatever, you can get a lot of value out of him. Now, if you want to play a little sneakier though, if you start him on the back line though, you're going to have this 2 damage flank, which can do 2 damage to either an offense or a carry. 2 damage on a carry is actually a really good prospect. If you imagine that your opponent has an assassin, like, Feral, 2 damage is all the damage it takes. That's exactly as much damage as you need. So another option, if you're playing Cerberus up front, and he does happen to take that 3 damage, making him critical, then he has this ability here, which will both flank dealing 1 damage and healing 1 from himself. So you basically just get to move that over. Oh, and it hits a carry or support. So you get to hit their squishies as you do that. Or alternately, if he's taken, say, 4 damage, you can throw 1 on Anastasia's heal to pull 1 of those off and then place the other on his get him ability, and that will move the other over. And so this way you've done another point of damage, essentially mitigated 2 more points of damage for 2 mana, and he's still free to attack and do that potential 5 more damage. So really easy to get really good value out of him. The final ability that you'll notice on Cerberus is Retriever, and Retriever is a positioning ability which lets you target an opposing hero and pull them forward. So if an enemy had an Anastasia and she were in the back line, you'd be able to pull her forward. So use that to pull out, again, annoying characters like, Feral. Feral and Cerberus probably don't really get along, which makes sense because Feral is hunting Cerberus in the lore. That's for you lore nerds out there. Lore nerds. So the last thing that we will talk about are the offense characters. And I know what you're going to say, but Orion, Marduk isn't an offense character, and that's what makes him cool. So we'll look at him first real quick. What Marduk is a support character. He has a couple of really, really neat features that are actually pretty interesting. The first one is that on reveal, he will grant a vision token, and the vision token will prevent the next flank that comes that character's way. So it's essentially very similar to ability armor, but with against flanks. Also, Marduk has this handy ability that he can use against any of his ally characters, and ally means not yourself, but on your team, but not yourself. And that character cannot be targeted next turn, so you can just put one of these hidden tokens on them to make sure that they're not targeted. Why would you want to do that? per se? Well, let's say, as we were talking earlier, if your Cerberus was sitting there and he had 3 damage on him, and you spend 1 to redistribute 1 of those damage, then you can spend the other to cover him, and now he cannot be attacked next turn. So now your opponent has to do something, say, target your tanks, instead of the squishy carry who is on the brink of death, and when it comes back to your turn, you can now remove this and go in for the kill. And again, that's how you get really good value out of these characters, with Marduk supporting you. This ability is a rear ability, but I'm just showing you side by side for simplicity. Now, what makes Marduk really cool is that he can go from a rear line support character to a frontline offense character. So what this ability lets him do is you spend the 1 mana here, and he will gain +2 dominance, and that essentially makes him a 6. And then he will gain a armor token, like that, which will prevent the next point of damage. So what you're seeing here is essentially a 6 dominance character with 4 health if he hasn't taken A already, 2 range shot, and he criticals on 3+. Again, from that special forces training, he has a higher critical than average for a support character. The benefit of this, though, is that unlike most frontline offense characters, he is not an offense character. He is still a support. So abilities that specifically target offense characters, say Feral. Feral has a flank ability that targets tanks or offense characters. They wouldn't be able to target Marduk. So Marduk is actually pretty clutch. Your trade-off is that you don't get to heal anyone, so you have to be proactive with everything that he does. But if you plan it out right, you can actually get a lot of value out of this guy. Marduk is quickly becoming a fan favorite. So with that out of the way, let's get to our offenses, our real offenses, our full offenses. So let's talk first about Hain. And Hain's interesting because this is one of the newer Hain redesigns. In this Hain redesign, he has a couple of really neat features. That first one being this rear line flank against supports or carries. Again, similar to Cerberus, if you start with Hain and Cerberus in your back line, then really quickly you can just destroy your opponent's back lines with flanks, all kinds of flanks all day, every day. And that costs 2 mana right there. This ability here is a fast ability, which will allow you to rotate between lanes. The version I'm showing you right now is the full version. In the print and play versions of what you have, there's not reference to the jungle because the jungle isn't present in that particular portion of the game. But what this ability essentially lets you do is for your 1 mana, you can take him from the back to the front, and because it's fast, you can still attack and deal that damage. So that's a really, really neat ability to be able to kind of start in the back, do some surprise damage, and then come up and do more damage. That's about 5 damage right there if you can get all of that off at the cost of about 3 mana, which isn't bad at all. And then further, because he's an offense character, he has those pretty decent criticals on a 3+, so there's a good chance if you roll, you're probably going to get your critical out of him. Now we'll come over to Hollow. Hollow is actually one of my favorite characters. I've gotten a lot of value out of him throughout the year of testing this game. So what you have here is a very basic ability. This one will let you do 1 flanking damage and a stun to a carry or support character. So you'll notice that this team has a lot of mobility. If you're playing like a really active game, you'd recognize it as being like very mobile, as the ability to get into the back lines. But that's essentially what this does, is a lot of these characters can get into your opponent's back lines and just kind of cause havoc back there, and really just kind of mess them up. So this ability for just 1 mana lets you do a stun and a flank damage to a carry or support. So again, use that to either say knock out Feral, so he doesn't burst you next turn, or knock out a healer, of which the orange team has 2 healers, so you can knock one of them out and guarantee a kill potentially. And this ability which back in the day, Stalk used to cost 1 mana, and it was ferocious. It was terrible. So I increased the cost to 2 mana. And for me, this is my bread and butter. This is why I play this guy. Because essentially you play 2 mana and the next turn your opponent goes, he cannot be targeted. So you can get into some really neat combinations here. Neat if it's you, not so neat if it's your opponent, where you can essentially, have 2 characters in the front line, and we're going to take Marduk and put him in the back line. And your first action can be activating Hollow Stalk. Your second action can be some Covering Fire on Titan. And that means that your opponent's turn can only be taken doing things that don't attack your front line. They either have to throw some range damage at you or hope that they have some cooldowns on some abilities that, and by cooldown, I mean the ability is active and ready to be used. So hopefully they have an ability that can maybe buff their character or something like that they can use in this off time when they can't, guard these 2 characters. And you'll come back next turn. Both of these would be off. And now what you have here, a 4 damage, 4 health, 6 dominance, beast of a hunter who is looking for something to shoot in the faces. It is close range damage, melee damage, instead of range damage. The melee damage is the giant sword that he carries, where the range damage is the bow and arrow for the stun there. But 4 damage out of an offense where normally you only get 4 damage out of a carry can be huge. It may seem like not that much because it's just one damage, but you have to remember that most offense characters have 4 health. So being able to put down 4 damage is actually a big deal. It means that with one attack, you can take out, kind of the linchpin of your opponent's strategy. So being able to have 2 characters that you can coordinate at the same time and throw 8, possibly 9 or 10 damage all in one turn, very devastating. What you will notice about this team is because these values are so low that you may have to get, say if these were the last 2 of your characters, you may have to do so much damage that you get them down to frequently one character, so that your 2 characters can still equal or greater that character. Or, maybe you can do 2 characters if you have, you can keep 2 of their characters out if you have kind of one of the 5 or 6s out. So overall with the blue team, this is really going to be for the type of player that likes the micromanage, that likes to use every ability in their kit, that likes to really experiment with like what kind of combinations and how they can figure out how to play better. If you want to learn how to play the game and the depth of the mechanics, the blue team will teach you a lot about that in terms of timing and positioning and really just kind of pacing yourself, pacing your mana, pacing everything. So this team is going to be probably a little bit more challenging to play, but I think it's going to be more rewarding if you can kind of figure out all the depth that there is there. So yeah, I think what's really cool about the orange and the blue team is they give you 2 different styles to play. So when you're switching back and forth, you can kind of figure out like what do you like and what works best for you. And I think this will wrap it up for now. So anyway, thank you for listening to my presentation on the blue team. And hope this helps. If you have any questions, the FAQ on Board Game Geek is linked below. Also linked below are the Ask Me Anything on Board Game Geek, where if you have any questions for me at all, you can leave those there. If you've played the game and you like it, please rate on BGG, leave comments letting people know that you've tried it. I think it's important for people to know that people are actually out here having a good time enjoying the game, and that will help move everything forward. So until next time, you know who I am, Marian. Peace.